Hello, don't hear you. Hello, hello. I don't hear you.
No, me neither.
I just realized I didn't put on my sound. So again, to sum up, the Rebbe was talking about up till now in Ois Dalet about the concept of our the idea of Rish Chodesh. That there's two levels of Rish Chodesh. The higher level of Rish Chodesh is that Chachma, the level of Yankov, bypasses the midos and comes down directly to Malchus. That's why even though it's Mutar B'Asiyas Malachim, this higher level of Rish Chodesh is not called Yemei HaMais, because Yemei HaMais has to do with the 6 days of creation. The 6 days of creation is the level of the 6 midas. And since the higher level of Rish Chodesh bypasses the 6 midas, therefore, because of that, we are not calling it Yemei HaMais, because the midas are only Maivir, and it's like coming down from an idea, let's say, when a person has an intellectual understanding of something, and it has nothing to do with emotions, even though, like we said before, that the premise might have to do with intellect, with emotions, the reason why he's interested in this thing and so on, but the actual intellect has nothing to do with the level of emotions. So it bypasses the emotions and goes straight down to speech and to action, which is what Malchus is about. The same thing, this higher level of Rish Chodesh that we were speaking about, because it says Rosh Chodshechem in the plural. Rosh Chodshechem in the plural means to say that there are multiple levels in Rish Chodesh. So the higher level of Rish Chodesh, the level it's represented by Yaakov, is a level that is going from Chachma directly into Malchus, bypassing the Midas, not so much Bislapshus and Midas in the way of Maivir and so on. Now the Rebbe is going to connect this with our avoida in avodas Hashem. What are the types of avoida that bypass and deal with the level of the midas, and what's a level that comes straight from Chachma, straight from Seichel, it comes down into the midas. Line 27, bottom of page Yud Aleph, the 7th page of the Maimer. The idea behind this, of this level of Rish Chodesh, of the Chachma coming straight into Malchus. What is that in the service of a person today? In a Tachas B'riyas Ha'adam, the ultimate purpose in the creation of a person. Chazal say, top of page base. I was created to serve my maker. How is that done? How does a person do the service? The service primarily is through his thought, speech, and deed in the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. And he brings a pasuk for this, that thought, speech, and deed is what we're doing over here in the Torah mitzvahs. Like it says in the pasuk, the matter is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to do it. So this brings down, the mouth goes on the power of speech, the heart goes on the thought, and lasoisri goes on the level of action. But in that level of doing Torah mitzvahs, the machshava dibra ma'isa, which is, we're going to explain, corresponds to the level of malchus. There are two ways how the machshava dibra ma'isa can be receiving from the higher koiches of the person. So he says in line 4, but the general service in this machshava dibra ma'isa that a person needs to and has to do, could be in two manners. Yes, there's such a manner that avoidam is out of and as a result of the emotions in the heart. In other words, the emotions are what motivate him. His love and awe of Hashem, his other feelings are motivating his thought, his speech, his deed. It could be that the avodah itself is called action. Why is it called action? Because the avodah is doing things in thought, doing things in speech, doing things in action. As opposed to the emotions are called a concealed love, meaning that Yerushalanu Maviseinu is something that's inherited from our forefathers and that's concealed within us. But the actual action, the doing of something, that is the action of Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh. Now, this action that he's doing is informed by and impacted by his midas, and to the degree that the midas are pushing him and causing him to think properly, to speak properly, to do properly, that's the to what degree his machshava dibur ma'aseh is the way it's supposed to be. So he says in line 9, the movement's understood. Also the bit that through that it becomes the avodah. Like we said before, the avodah is the actual action. The actual action is in a state of bittul. He's bottled to Hashem, and therefore he thinks right, he speaks right, he does right. But that bittul itself is created by what? Ulafi inyan amid. This is according to the emotions. Upon him, if he doesn't have a full-blown emotion, fully explosive and passionate love, at least he has the concealed love, the basic love that every yid has. It doesn't want to be torn away from Hashem and so on. But kifi shehem etzadas, it's the midas the way they are on their own. That the intellect does not shine over there in a revealed way. In other words, even though the emotions are rooted in the intellect, but just like we spoke about before, it's possible when something comes from the intellect, or even higher than the intellect, we said that the midas, the yichud zun, comes from yichud avoch chachma bina, comes from arich, comes from atik, comes from atzmus. But what happens is, in a normal type of descent, is it comes down to slapshus. And all that's recognizable is not keser, not atzmus, not atik, not arich, not intellect. What's recognizable? Yichud zav and nukva. It's called the union of the midas and malchus, because everything else is bihislapshus, and they have now become transformed and become, if you will, midasized. They are now midas. The same thing over here. In the avoid of a person, when his bittul is based off of, and his avoida machshava dibur ma'aseh is based off of his emotions, so the intellect is not shining there revealed, even though the intellect might have been responsible for the emotions. What's shining over there is the emotions. So as much as the emotions motivate him, that's how much the midas are. No more than how much the emotions motivate. In other words, the moichin and anything else is not what's impacting him in his avodah and his machshava dibur ma'aseh. That is one level in the avodah, reflecting the lower level, let's say, of Rosh Chodesh or the normal days of the week. But then there's an avodah that reflects this higher level of Rosh Chodesh. Line 12, there's a level that is higher. The avoid is through drawing down the intellect in the emotions. When we speak about during Sfira, we have the idea that it should be, the Netzach Shabbat Hoyt Shabbat, etc. We're not just talking about that these midos should exist. We are talking about that the intellect that motivates and creates and illuminates and elevates those midas are what we're drawing down. That's what's brought down in Chassidus Forum and in other places, Mamar Madal Terebe, and the Tzemach Tzedek, that it's animating and making the midas grow. In other words, there's Hodsh b'Tiferes on its own, but then there's the Moichin's impact on Hodsh b'Tiferes. So, and to such a degree, the impact can be so powerful. Till even more so, the emotions become elevated and rise up to the level of the intellect. It's like not so much emotions, it's more intellect than emotions, even though we're calling it Hodsh b'Tiferes and so on. And even higher than that, there is until they're actually called by the intellectual level. By the way, this also helps understand the idea how we call the 49 days of Sfira, we call it Chamishim Share what? Chamishim Share Bina. It's the 50 gates of Bina, not the 50 or 49 gates of Midas. We are dealing with 50 gates of Sfiras Bina with the intellect, because the purpose of Sfiras Haimer is drawing down the level of intellect into the emotions, to raise up to the emotions to the level of intellect to such a degree that we see the emotions just as intellectual expressions, because they are the 50 gates of Bina. They are the Hodsh b'Tiferes of Bina. They are an intellectual type of thing. So then, instead of what we said before, that a person's avodah machshava dibur ma'is is motivated by his emotions, instead, when they have the level of the intellect shining in the midas, so then what we have is that his avodah is not an emotionally based and triggered bittul and avodah, but his avodah and his bittul is an intellectual bittul, a higher form of bittul. Similar to what was mentioned earlier in the metaphor concerning the level of speech and action where emotions are not involved, where it's getting directly from the idea that the person is studying tchuna, studying astronomy, etc. And he right away brings that down into speech and into action without need of emotions. So it's directly connecting the intellect to the speech and the action. The same thing, this person's avodah, v'cheinu ba'avodah. So to avodas Hashem, meaning shamachshava dibur ma'aseh, that the thought, speech, and deed of the Yid and Torah mitzvahs, hey mitzada is bonus, are a result of the person's meditation. Ba'ad is bonus, to such a degree of meditation in the level of intellect, the way they are on their own, beyond connection, association with emotions. Brought down Chassidus, there's a level of intellect that's associated with emotions. There's a level and gives birth to emotions, and it's about emotions, and it's how these ideas will bring to emotions. But then there's the pure intellect, similar to what we said before, that there's certain ideas that don't need validation of emotion or so on, like Chokmah Satchuna or other sciences. They can go directly from intellect into speech and to action. So therefore, the Rebbe goes back to our case. If you have an avodah that is intellectually based, from this is understood the great advantage in the bittul, because it's a result of the intellect. We know that intellect has a greater level of bittul than emotions. Emotions is a level of yesh misha oyev, it's my ego, I love, and so on. And even the yira could be, even the awe could be yesh misha yore. Intellect is just the truth, recognizing the truth itself. It's a higher level of bittul in moichin than there is in midas. For that reason, because moichin is a greater level of bittul than the midas are, that's why it says that shviras hakelim and toyu, the breaking of the vessels, which was because the spheres could not get along with each other, that was in the midas. In the midas, there was the breaking of the vessels. In the moichin, there was no breaking of the vessels, because the moichin don't have that problem of lack of bittul even in the world of Torah. That's why Chachma is the level of Koyachma, the level of bittul, and that obviously animates the rest of the Moichin as well. So therefore, this idea that we said earlier about Rosh Chodesh not being the day of Maisa, the higher level of Rosh Chodesh, the level of Yaakov, where intellect goes straight into Malchus, into the levels of Dibra Maisa, is reflected as well in a person's avodah when his machshava Dibra Maisa is not animated and not triggered and not dependent upon a bittul that's engendered by emotions, but it's dependent and as a result of the bittul, it's a higher caliber bittul, the bittul that comes because of the moich. Any questions before we go on?
Would an example of this be like when someone's doing the slam and they ask someone to put on tefillin and they just do it? They don't understand what it is, what it's about. They don't realize anything about it. They just
that's Kabbalah soil. That's just the avodah of bittul, Mesiras Nefesh, Kabbalah soil. That has its own level and idea behind it and qualities of it. That's not what we're talking about over here. Here we're talking about a level where he's so impacted and so taken by his intellectual understanding of Hashem that he's completely bottled to Hashem because of it. And that impacts, obviously, that his thought, speech, and deed are of a higher caliber than just if it was being pushed by his emotional commitment to Hashem. Okay, hey, line 25 on the 8th page of the Maimon. According to this, we can explain also what's the entire month of Nisan about, and obviously that's what Rosh Chodesh Nisan is, because we said that the month of Nisan is unique, that the month of Nisan, being that we don't say Tachnon, and it's prohibited to fast in it, etc. Every day of the month is like Rosh Chodesh, meaning the entire month is experiencing this level of the intellect coming down into Machshava Dibra Maisa, the greater level of bittul that comes not from the level right before Machshava Dibra Maisa, but from something way high. What's the idea of the month of Nisan? Chodesh Agula, the month of the redemption. Yisrael Mitzrayim, that was the month that Yidden were redeemed in Mitzrayim over 3,000 years ago. And in this month, will be redeemed by prefacing what's known. Inyan Hagula, top of page with Gimel, that follows exile. It's likened to birth. There's the Nevuos Yechezkel that we're also referring to in the Haggadah of Pesach, where it says over there that you're in the blood and the Maya Chayi and all of that is all speaking about in that Nevuah how the Jewish people leaving out in Mitzrayim is like the birth of the Jewish people. So prior to birth, before the Geula, when they were in Golus, it's a state of being in the mother's womb. Vor become a drushim, become a Teres Chaim, like explained in many Mamorim and also in Teres Chaim of the Middle Rebbe. So the Rebbe is going to analyze the difference between the life of a child before being born and after being born. Though even when the child is in his mother's womb, there's a time when he's already complete with all his limbs and organs and blood vessels and sinews, etc., etc. Until he even has hairs and nails. That is an indication that the fetus is already complete and he's ready, that he should become revealed, that he should become born. So if a child is already born with hair and nails, we know is born to a full gestational period of 9 months, etc. It's not the body of being a navel, whatever. So seemingly, why would we make a differentiation between a child a moment before he's born and a moment after he's born? A moment before he's born, he also had everything complete, all the organs, all the limbs, hair, even the hair and the nails, even the most external parts of the child. So still in all, there's a big difference between before being born and after being born. Kol Makom line 7 still in all. It's still in the matter of concealment. The child being a child, he's still concealed. Well, after this concealment becomes the birth. It's called a redemption. This is also what it says in the pasuk. This is actually in Tafshin Lamed Beis. This was the kapitel Tilim of the Rebbe that he was saying then, kapitel Ayin Aleph, that it says over there in kapitel Ayin Aleph and Tilim, that upon you I relied and I was supported from the stomach, from my mother's innards. Ata goizi, you cut me out, meaning you took me out of my mother's womb. Hainu, what does that mean? Though still in the stomach, in the innards of my mother, there's already all matters of the child, like we said before, until the level that I'm relying on Hashem. In other words, he has everything. He has even a connection with Hashem. Still in all, it's not the same as a state and situation after the child comes out from his concealment within the womb to be revealed. Then when the child is born, there becomes a core and primary change between before and after. And because of that, there's differences from one extreme to another extreme between a fetus and a baby that's actually born. Not only according to the mysterious parts of the Torah, the hints of Torah, the drushes of Torah, the secrets of the Torah, even according to halacha, there are different halachas that change the moment the child is born. He's called a human being beforehand. He's not called a human being. There are different results about this, and there are different ideas that come out of halacha. So we see that there's a big difference between a child before birth and after birth. So the same thing, the Geula and Golus, even though seemingly it's the same peoples, the same Yidden, there's still a core and basic difference between what we were in Golus or what we are in Golus and how we're going to be and by the time of the Geula. And the Rebbe connects us back, what we said before, that is connected with Rosh Chodesh. The entire month of Nisan, which is the Chodesh HaGeula, is all about Rosh Chodesh, like we said. Every day is Rosh Chodesh, because this idea is manifested in Rosh Chodesh. It says in line 18, this is also the connection to the idea of Rosh Chodesh. The coming down of Chachma, the Malchus, is not through being enclosed in Midas, like we said before. The higher level of Rosh Chodesh is coming down Chachma directly and skipping the Midas. Because when we talk about enclothing, not Maiver, but being enclosed, the thing that's becoming enclosed, the Chachma, is being concealed, like a child being concealed in his mother's womb, in the level beneath it in which it was enclosed. In this case, it's Midas. Because in an ordinary day, when Chachma is enclosed in Midas, what do we say? It's a union between Midas and Malchus. Why? Because Chachma is concealed. The intellect is concealed, and any other higher levels are concealed as well. And to such a degree that it becomes, like I mentioned before, the word Midasized that I made up, it becomes now transformed. The Chachma is not Chachma anymore when it's Midas. It's now Midas. When we say a higher level is enclosed in a lower level, not passing through B'derech Maiver, but B'derech Islabshus, so then that higher level becomes changed and becomes like the lower levels in which it was enclosed. Just to give an example of something else, Baruch needs to be able to understand this concept. Dr. Rebbe Tanya brings down in Perek Beis, that there is the neshama comes down from above to below, and it's there are different neshamas, even though all neshamas come from Chachmei Law. So the Perek Beis, he wants to understand, how could it be if all neshamas are Chachmei Law, how could it be, coming from Hashem's thought, that there's differences in neshamas? Isn't that indicative that we're all coming from different levels? So he says it's like a child that's in the mother's stomach, or actually the droplet, even though the droplet comes from the father's brain, but still in all, certain aspects of the droplet during the process of pregnancy become changed to even become so low as toenails. Others remain and retain the brain connection, and they become the brain of the child. So they're just like it started off with the father's brain, now it's also the brain of the child. The nimshal is that there are certain neshamas, when they come down from Chochmah Ilah, they come from Chochmah Datzilus, they then became Malchus, the Nefesh Dasir. How come? Because when Chochmah Ilah came down into Malchus Datzilus, it came down the way of Slapshus. And now it's not Chochmah anymore, it's like Malchus. And then the Malchus Datzilus became enclosed in Bria, and then Bria came closed in Yitzir, and Yitzir in Asiyah till it came Malchus and Malchus of Asiyah. So even though it initially became Chochmah, and deep down at its core, it still maintains its Chochmah core, but it's become transformed to become now like the world of Asiyah. That's the majority of the neshamas, especially in these days, the Mashiach, the heels, and so on, that we are transformed now, even though it's Chachma coming down, but it's enclosed now in all these different levels, and it becomes now like the world of Bria, and like the world of Yitzira, and even like the world of Asiyah, and even like the lowest level of the world of Asiyah. That is the same thing that he's saying over here, that there's the level of Chachma that once it's enclosed in Zeir Ampin, in a way of Islapshus, so that enclothing is in such a type of way that the Chachma now is not what's manifest. What we see over here is Zah. And that is like the state of being in a state of Ibur, that the Chachma is concealed in Zeir Ampin, like a child being concealed in the mud. The Ilu, as opposed to line 25. When the Amshacha is not in the way of being enclosed, so that's the idea of redemption. Why is it redemption? Because we said redemption is going from the state of concealment in the mother's womb to now becoming a totally new person. And that's a core difference. It's completely different than it was before. The same thing in Geula, he's redeemed from the garments that we mentioned before. In other words, the garments that the Chachma is now enclosed or was enclosed in Zah, by Rosh Chodesh, by Geula, which we're saying, Rosh Chodesh and Geula, Chodesh and Geula is all the same thing. He's being redeemed from that enclothing, and now the Chachma and the Moichen and the intellect is now standing revealed the way it is on its own, not the way it's enclosed and, if you will, watered down and midicized now. Before, how it was before it was enclosed in the level beneath. And in the next part of Maimer, he's going to explain how this relates to the general idea of Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is in connection with the pasuk that we began at the beginning of the Maimer. Any questions?